Welcome to Smart Man and Smarter Woman, a podcast for entrepreneurs. I am Steve Lotz.
And I am Juliet Aurora.
And we are your co-hosts. We have a great show for you today with our very special guest, Mr. Michael Lee, who is a serial entrepreneur, virtual CFO, speaker, coach, and advisor. So he's a very busy guy. But before I officially introduce Michael, let's hear from my wonderful co-host, the smarter woman herself, Juliet.
Good afternoon, or I guess it could be good evening or good morning, depending on when you're listening to this. So I'm actually really looking forward to today's episode. I met Michael back in 2018 when his firm had been voted into the global firm of the future for his accounting and bookkeeping firm. And so Michael is in the same industry as we are. And so I met Michael briefly when he had won the US title and was vying for the global title. Only met him briefly, was excited about what he was doing, but got to know Michael a little bit better. We're both members of a very small group called the Accounting Salon in the US. And got to meet Michael and learn more about him and get to know him a lot better, and have been so impressed with all the things that I don't know where he finds the time to do all the things that he does. And there's actually a running joke in the Accounting Salon that there's probably only a matter of time that we're all going to be carrying banners, Michael Lee for president, that he's just going to take over the world with all the stuff that he's doing. So very excited about the conversation that's coming today. Welcome, Michael.
Great. Thank you, Juliet. Thank you, Steve.
And as I mentioned at the beginning, our podcast is for and about entrepreneurs. Our goal with each episode is going to be try to provide some entertainment, but most importantly, some value, some insights, hopefully some gold nuggets that can help other entrepreneurs on their journey, no matter where they are on their journey, whether they're just starting or they've been an entrepreneur for many years. So I'll give you a little bit of background on Michael, and then we'll get right into our chat together. So he currently lives in Burlington, Vermont, with his wife and kids. Graduated from Arizona State University with a degree in business administration, and then obtained his MBA in entrepreneurial studies from Babson College. And he is currently the owner of, and I guess this is why we call him a serial entrepreneur. He has one company called Reconciled, which is an online bookkeeping and accounting service that he launched in 2015. Another business which launched, I believe, in 2019 called Humanly, which provides on-demand HR solutions for entrepreneurs. And then that was followed by a business, and forgive me if I don't pronounce this correctly, Michael, but I'll have my best run at it. Saasable, an online app for business owners, bookkeepers, and accountants to help them keep track of their recurring revenue metrics. So welcome, Michael, and thank you very much for joining us. How did I do there? Did I mess that up completely, or was it accurate?
You did fine, Steve. You did fine.
Okay, well, thank you. Glad you could join us. So I guess we should start off. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your background, and maybe how did you get started on your own entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, Steve. I grew up in Tempe, Arizona, and my parents were refugees from Cambodia. So me and my siblings watched our parents create something out of nothing, create a life for themselves through their entrepreneurial spirit. They both were entrepreneurs and both retired as entrepreneurs as well. So my siblings and I watched them do that. And when I got to college at Arizona State, I find myself always getting involved in starting new things. And whether it was a new club, a new organization, and my sophomore year of college, I actually started a software company that built Palm Pilot software. If you guys remember when the Palm Pilots were around.
Yep. Yes.
Yes. So
we're dating ourselves. We're dating ourselves, but yes.
Yeah. So my high school buddy and I built Palm Pilot software, and at the time began developing a markup language that would convert websites to be readable on Palm Pilots and other wireless devices. We spent about 2 years doing that, and at that time was studying in Arizona State, trying to get through, trying to finish college. I finished college and then went to work for a accounting firm right out of college, not in their tax or audit group, but in their consulting group, and that's where I kind of cut my teeth on general consulting for this accounting firm. And so, that was the start of my entrepreneurial journey is in college and kind of figuring out what I was really good at. And I found myself really being great at just starting new things and coming up with the idea and trying to bring that into fruition. And that's probably where things began.
Are your siblings also following the entrepreneurial path?
Yes. My older sister is a very successful real estate entrepreneur and has done very well for herself. Has made millions of dollars doing that here in Arizona. And then my younger brother, who's a year younger than me, but about a foot taller than me, he is a very successful consumer electronics and commercial electronics entrepreneur. So he actually has his own consumer electronics brand. Most would not be familiar with it because usually businesses are buying his brand. Think, electronics for big hotels and stadiums, electronics for luxury homes, things like that. So he's done very well for himself there. So my siblings have followed that suit, and none of us got formal training in our undergrad days. We really got that root from our parents, and then I was the only one to get kind of formalized entrepreneurial training when I got my MBA at Babson College.
Okay. So it definitely did flow from your parents and watching what they built, that all of you have kind of followed different versions of that path, but interesting.
Yeah, no, and that is fascinating, right? That all three of you are successful in your own right, but completely different areas. Like they're not even related. Other than they obviously need accounting.
Right. And my mother and father. My mother was a seamstress. She learned how to do seamstress work when she got to America, and basically started a path on that and built her own seamstress business and was able to sell it before retirement. And then my father, who never cooked anything in his life, learned how to cook when he came to America and was a chef for most of his life, and then eventually opened his own restaurant and sold that before retirement. So these were all skills that they gained here, building a life from nothing, and then they kind of indirectly passed on to us by allowing us to watch and modeling it for us.
We will continue with our conversation right after this message from a friend of the show. AIS Solutions is an award-winning cloud accounting firm serving small business across Canada. If you want to migrate to a powerful and effective paperless accounting system and get your financials wherever you are, whenever you want them, then contact AIS Solutions team of trained professionals today at www.aissolutions.ca. And now, back to our show.
Well, what would you say would be the number one thing you learned from your parents in terms of, being an entrepreneur that has steadied you well in your own path?
Yeah, I would say probably two or three main things. The one is you don't need a lot of resources or really any to begin your entrepreneurial journey. You can literally start with nothing. Two is you don't need to know the skill or even know the language in order to begin your entrepreneurial journey. You can learn a new skill, and you can learn a new language if that's what it takes, or you can learn the industry's language if that's what it takes. And three, you need enough willingness and enough hunger or desire to succeed. And so that's something that's usually self-created. It's often not given to you. It's very hard to replicate in people. It's usually created because of life circumstance or personality or the situation you're in. Some people call it self-motivation, right? So I think a few of those things we were able to kind of indirectly imbibe or take from our parents without them sitting down at the kitchen table and actually formally teaching us those lessons. So that those are definitely three lessons I learned. And probably the last one is like adversity is a strength. Facing adversity is a strength in your life, and so we shouldn't spend our lives or our times trying to get adversity to go away. It's actually something that we want to have in your life, in your kid's life, because learning how to deal with adversity and succeed through it, or even fail in it and learn why you failed, helps you become a better and better person and lets you deal with future adversity, which is all part of the entrepreneurial journey, is adversity all the time, right? Every day there's a new thing that's you're gonna have to learn or come against, and you're gonna have to learn how to push through it or punch through it to succeed.
So I have a question then. So my parents are first generation immigrants into Canada. Again, started with nothing. They weren't refugees, but came with very little and built a life for themselves and for my sister and myself. And your parents have done something similar, and you're, I guess, first generation that you were raised in America. So the values that I've learned growing up are very different than what my parents learned. And now that I have kids and mine are grown, I've seen that they don't have the same drive or the same that we did, watching our parents having to go through those struggles, because
Right.
They didn't necessarily see me go through those struggles. So do you think that is going to be different for your kids? Because your kids are still fairly young.
Yeah, my kids are fairly young, and I think there is a reality that unless we make intentional lifestyle decisions that allow them to be exposed to a similar kind of challenges that we had growing up, it will be very challenging for them to learn indirectly or directly the same lessons we learned. And so, for example, just simply the cost of living level you decide to live at, and the types of restaurants and places you decide to eat, and the places you shop, the kind of clothing you wear, the kind of cars you drive, the kind of home you'll buy, those send different messages to your children. And in some ways, and like, I'll take a tune from my siblings, both of whom I love and respect, and who have chosen to live at a lifestyle that I think my parents would never have imagined for us, never have imagined for us. And I would consider at the 1% or near the 1% of society. That sends a very different message to their kids you're raising when you're raised that way. And as opposed to the decision my wife and I have made is that we would never live at a lifestyle above middle class, even if we had the opportunity to live at that lifestyle. And that's a very intentional decision. It doesn't make us better, doesn't make us better people. What it does is for us is say, what values do we want to pass down to our kids?
Yeah.
And even at that level, I still find it challenging for my kids to learn the same grit, the same adversity that I faced and you faced, that I went through, because my kids aren't the first multi-ethnic or colored kids at their school. They're
Right.
not the first ones. They're not the first Chinese or Indian kids at their school. I was.
Yes, likewise. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not the first kids to be assumed that they don't know English. I was, right? I was the first kid where everyone assumed you don't know English, even though I was born a month after my parents came, and English was the primary language I learned. And so those are all the things, if you think through your history growing up, all the adversity, all the challenges, all the things you witness your parents do, save, work hard, eventually get you into the middle class, maybe even the upper middle class, that they're so proud of. We assume, okay, they worked that hard, let's pass that down to our kids. But then where do all those lessons go, and how do I still impart those? And that is challenging. And I agree with you. And then, on top of that, we live in this idyllic, beautiful state called Vermont where nothing bad happens. And there's very little diversity, and it's very progressive in its values. And so we're also challenged around how do I preserve the cultural heritage of my parents
Right.
that they gave to me and that I give to them when my kids they're not surrounded by it anymore or don't necessarily see it every day. That those first few years of eating on the floor with my family and my relatives, eating traditional Cambodian meals, going to traditional Cambodian gatherings, going to the park or going to free entertainment and not enjoying luxury at all.
Yeah.
My kids will never experience that,
Yeah.
and so those are definitely challenging.
Well, and as an entrepreneur, part of you mentioned this, part of the reason that entrepreneurs are successful is this hunger or this desire. And it really is a balance to be able to have your kids feel that. So my daughter, we put in private school up until grade 8. And we pulled her out in grade 8 when I was sitting around this table at her graduation with all the other moms, and it was a fairly high end. We were the poor people in the private school. And we were sitting around this table, and all these moms said, when they heard that I actually work, what? You work? How do you manage all of that? And then what they were talking about was, after graduation, they were going to the south of France for the summer, or, they were going to their cottage for the whole summer. None of their kids were working. None of them were working. And, Steve and I said to each other, we said, okay, well, is this what we want Sierra, who's our daughter, to feel that this is normal?
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, it's surrounding your kids with something. And so we pulled her out of private school, and put her in public school so that she would have a sense of normal. But it is a fine balance between saying, I want to give my kids a better life than I had, and then being able to still have them learn the things that you learned because you had difficult times. And we've totally gone off topic of entrepreneurship, and we're talking about parenting instead. But I thought it was fairly important.
I think in a lot of ways, entrepreneurship and parenting are very similar. So
Probably.
I'm not sure we went completely off topic at all. Michael, you mentioned, as an entrepreneur, that we face obstacle after obstacle after obstacle, and usually they're different each time. Can you think of, perhaps a main obstacle or a major obstacle that you have faced in your journey, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, I depending on your audience, I don't know how much they'll resonate with this, but one obstacle that I've had to overcome, and it took me a while to overcome, even at I'm 38 years old now, and even at 38, I still find sometimes challenging, is the idea of honoring your elder and how that relates in business. And so I found myself lacking confidence around selling myself, selling my services, selling my value when it came to talking to older people and older business owners, or those that I would consider in my culture growing up, my elders. And I would rarely, if ever, refer to my elders by their first name. I would have usually an uncle or aunt title for them. And so that was really challenging in business, especially as I went out on my own to begin my entrepreneurial journey, and having to speak to people whom I looked up at, either literally physically because I'm a short guy, but I looked up at, but also I looked up to because they're of older age, and how to sell that value that instinctively I didn't learn growing up to sell. Instead, I learned more of an honor and a learn from approach from elders. So that was definitely a challenge in how to do that, and how to say, look, I'm old enough to, one, say I do have value, and I'm old enough to communicate that I have value. Why do I feel like I'm still a child when I'm around or surrounded by these groups of people? And it all comes down to, obviously my own identity, how I view myself, my relationship with my dad, when my parents got divorced when I was young, and so my relation with my dad and how he was a part and then not a part of my life. But also that just the fact that cultural upbringing, there's just a relationship, a proper way you address relationship and view relationship between older people and younger people. And so I think that was a big part of the challenge I had, and never being able to, or having a hard time to fully embracing, hey, I can sit in this seat of CEO and I can sell the value that I want to sell for money without disrespecting, without dishonoring people that are older than me. That's possible. And that's weird, very weird probably to hear, because I did grow up in America. I did grow up with learning and understanding American and Western norms. It's just I just found myself very surprised when I entered the entrepreneurial field how difficult it was for me to overcome that. And so yeah, I think that's part of probably one of the biggest challenges I had. And then the second was probably learning to say no, to good opportunities for great ones. And I wouldn't say I've been perfect at that yet. I'm still learning both sides, but learning to say no for great opportunities versus good ones,
Yeah.
Okay, so can you shed some light on maybe what your qualification process is for you to determine, because at the beginning you don't always know if it's going to be good versus great. So can you share some insight as to what your thought process is when you are offered an opportunity to decide?
Yeah. So I think by you defining what, first of all, what your overall goals are for yourself, or your, professionally, personally, what those overall goals are, and what your own value system is, and kind of putting that down so that every opportunity that comes to you, or every idea that comes to your mind, you can have a filter through in which you can process those. And then you want to mix that in with, okay, where am I where do I have natural strengths and talents, and also what's the highest value I can give to the world right now, that's unique to me, and that no one else you can uniquely provide. So I love the idea of, for example, innovating in the sports world, but I don't play a single sport. All I do is enjoy them. I enjoy going to a sports suite and enjoying the hot dogs and drinks.
Right.
That's the most I can think of. So any innovation in the sports world, I'm pretty much not going to be involved,
Okay.
even if I had the opportunity to, because there's about zero value I can provide in it, and it doesn't really fit my lifestyle, the values I have. Sports doesn't consume my life, right? So that would be one. I love the idea of one day. I enjoy traveling to and love staying in hotels, right? I love traveling. I love, especially with my wife, just love going places. But me ever running or owning a hotel or even being in the hospitality industry is kind of an absurd idea for me personally. So now, can I consult people and give advice and stuff like that? Yeah, that's great. But that's probably the highest value I could do. But me going out and actually, opening up a luxury or hotel or trying to innovate in that industry, it just doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't fit the category. And so those are the kind of, in my mind, that's how I filter great versus good. And the greatest and highest, opportunities for me would fit as many of those criteria as possible, right? And ultimately would match maybe even the way I want to live with my family and integrate my family into my life. If there's an idea out there or an opportunity that integrates that ultimately, and my belief system and a faith system, all that stuff, then that's probably the greatest of value of something I should be participating in.
So you have certainly a lot of introspective responses that you have to be very clear on who you are, what your belief system is, what your values are, to be able to easily be able to determine whether it's a good opportunity or a great opportunity. So that's a great answer. Thank you very much.
I mean, if you look at a lot of the, the really, I guess, famous entrepreneurs, the Steve Jobs, the Richard Bransons, even the Warren Buffett, I mean, all of them say, one of the keys to being successful are the things you say no to, that you've really got to learn how to focus on making sure the yeses that you say are for the right opportunities. So that was great. Thank you for that, Michael. Most entrepreneurs are continuous learners. How do you continue to learn in order to stay on top of things within, the many roles you have? I mean, is it books, videos, podcasts? What do you find are the best things for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do spend time, reading whether it's books, articles, magazines, newsletters, anything I can get a hold on that I believe is going to provide the great value to me and help me learn new things, and also help me keep up to date on industry trends. I like to read. I like to read material that allows me to learn lifelong wisdom and lessons versus just short-term fables or short-term fads. And so I do generally find myself wanting to read biographies, history, as well as books that have stood the test of time. So whether they be spiritual, philosophical, cultural, if they've stood the test of time and have provided wisdom to millions of people for a long period of time, they're probably going to stand the test of time for the next few thousand years. And so it's hard for me to start and read a book that I believe after starting it will not stand the test of time and will not be relevant in 50 or 100 years. And usually those books aren't worth finishing. A lot of the books aren't worth finishing. If you think about how many books are produced and that you read every year, most of them aren't worth finishing. And so I try to find those books, and usually those books stand out the moment you start reading them, because there is wisdom or unique wisdom that you get a sense of from reading those books. So I spend most of my time doing that, and I core myself, and many people believe this, many people don't. I'm a person of faith, so I kind of anchor myself in the Bible, which is I considered one of the greatest books ever written, if you want to call it that, or ever inspired. And so it's impacted millions of people in history, and many think is the inspiration for the Western world and Judeo-Christian thought. So I ground myself in a lot of the wisdom from there, but then surround myself by other wisdom literature as well. And then I participate in things like the Accounting Salon, but also I'm a part of this group called Vistage that meets once a month, where I meet daily. I meet a full day a month with CEOs in my community to basically do peer coaching with one another. So I'm a strong believer in coaching, mentoring, and basically putting yourself out there to learn from people. But also means you need to be vulnerable as well, right? In order to learn, you need to be vulnerable. You need to be able to say, hey, I want to learn from you. I want to hear. I want to learn something. And so I've taken the approach that every person I meet, no matter how young or old, that there's something I can learn from them in every interaction I have. And I try to take the best opportunity I have with anybody I have to ask questions and to pick their brains and figure out, tell me about how you do that, or tell me about this thing about your life, because I want to be able to pick up insights that I can apply to my life.
That's great. Yeah, Juliet and I are huge believers in the value of coaching. And I think we preach that to every entrepreneur we ever meet,
Absolutely.
And they say, give me that, what's the most important advice you can give me? Get a coach. It will get you on the right path. Obviously the right coach, but
Yes.
we believe coaching. I think we've probably worked with a coach all the time now since 2011, 2012?
11. Yeah, we started in 11.
Yeah. So, and I think we're on our third coach, and each time it's we needed to hear a different voice, or we were looking for a different type of skill set within the coach because of where we were in our journey. And all of them have been fantastic that we've worked with, and we needed them at that time. And so I think it's one of the most important decisions any entrepreneur can ever make. I may have just given the answer to the next question, and that was going to be what advice would you give to someone if they were thinking of becoming a new entrepreneur?
That's a great question. I would say one is, if you're thinking about it, or you don't know whether or not that's kind of a thing in you, I'd first go and surround yourself or talk with friends or family members that you know are entrepreneurs, or go reach out to a respected entrepreneur that you know, that's accessible to you, and go talk to them about the journey you're on and what you're thinking about. And so there's one thing in regards to, starting on an entrepreneurial journey, and then there's another in, well, what is the product or service that you're actually going to bring to the market? And that's a whole different conversation. So many people have ideas, and not all those ideas are worth pursuing, and not all those ideas have a big enough market to pursue that can make it a real business. And so I think having a conversation and surrounding yourself, like you said, with mentors, coaches, advisors that can be honest with you. And so that usually means it's probably not close family members. It probably means it's that successful uncle that, is kind of, maybe that successful uncle you don't really know that well, and maybe you don't respect a lot because he seems to work all the time. Or it's that cousin or that friend that you've lost touch with, but wow, you've heard they've done amazing with their startup, and you want to reach out to them and just ask advice. I would say doing that first would be a great start.
That's great. And that brings us to the part of the podcast that we stole from, or I guess we borrowed. From. What did we do? We borrowed.
We borrowed it.
We borrowed. Okay.
We were inspired by that. We were inspired by
that. I like. Okay, perfect. I knew you would come up with the perfect analogy. So we were inspired by this, which was from a show that used to be on TV many, many years ago called The Actors Studio with James Lipton. And it used to be one of my favorite shows. And my favorite part of the show was at the end of every interview he did, he had a series of questions that he asked the same questions of everyone who was ever on the show. And I loved it. So I thought, if I am ever fortunate enough to have our own podcast, I wasn't really thinking TV show, I was thinking podcast, then I would do something similar. So I'd like to ask you some questions. The first one is, what one word best defines an entrepreneur?
Grit.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I'd say angel investor.
What profession would you not like to do?
Cook.
What sound or noise do you love?
What sound or noise?
Yeah, that's an unusual question. I have never heard that one before, but
yeah. I love the sound of running water.
Awesome. What book would you recommend that every entrepreneur should read?
Getting Naked by Patrick Lencioni.
Okay. When your own entrepreneurial journey is completed, what do you hope your legacy is?
That my kids know and follow the God that I love and follow, and that my friends and family know me for that same thing.
Excellent. Now, if our listeners wanted to connect with you online or offline, what is the best place for them to connect with you, Michael?
The best place to find me is on LinkedIn or Facebook, and you can just search Michael Lee, spelled L-Y, and you can connect with me there. It's very easy.
Okay.
And I'm always happy to connect with entrepreneurs or budding entrepreneurs and to talk about their journeys.
Awesome. And before we close out here, I will share a quote, which is one of the things I love to do. I'm a big quote person. So, my quote for this episode is: the future is not a place that we go, it is a place that we create.
Perfect.
And so I guess that brings this episode to a conclusion. Do you have anything you would like to add, Juliet?
No, just thank you very much, Michael, for joining us. Great conversation. And yes, we kind of got off track a little bit, but I always enjoy having a conversation with you, and hope to see you at Accounting Salon soon.
Great. Thanks, Juliet. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you very much, Michael. Really appreciate it. You've been a wonderful guest. And thank you also to the audience for tuning in and giving us a listen. Hope you found some value and it's been helpful to you. If you like the podcast, please keep tuning in and downloading and listening. And we do love reviews as well. So until next time, take good care of yourself and those that you love. Bye for now.